hard for us to remember when we were simply a soul, hanging out in the universe, enjoying our experience, looking down at this planet Earth. And perhaps we would wonder, what would it be like to just slide down through time and space and the density of matter and arrive on this physical, vibrantly beautiful planet filled with light and color and sound and water and sunshine and all of these adventures wide open for us to experience in the physical form. Each of us guiding one another and walking side by side in community. What would that journey be like? Welcome to Healing Our Souls. Good morning and welcome to Healing Our Souls. Today we are going to have a conversation with my friend and client, Anne, who is sitting in her child's baby room. Part of our journey has included her pregnancy and her delivery, so it's perfect. It's perfect that she's here. So I would like to introduce you to Anne. Hello. And we're going to, I guess we'll start by how you and I first met, and then we'll go from there. So we started working together. I just looked it up in my notes. It was September 9th, 9/9 of last year. Yeah. Which is perfect, right? And it's amazing. I think of how it's only been a year and your life has, literally just flipped upside down during the time that we've been doing our work. And wow, like such huge, beautiful changes. So it's perfect that we are talking today. And there's so much that I want us to cover. We'll see how far we get. You move very quickly in every area of your life, including energy work. So we'll see which parts we cover today. So what I would love, what I would love to start with is what brought you towards energy work. You were in Doha, which is in Qatar, which is right smack dab in the middle of the Middle East. So maybe we'll start with that, like how you ended up there. And we'll just kind of take it from there. So I'm going to flip the switch and let you take full center stage.
Okay. Yes. So I was, like you said, living in the Middle East, and I'd been there for 6 years. And when I first moved there, I really liked my work, and the place was okay. It was never great. But as I spent more time there, the work environment that I was in became more toxic and masculine, and there was like so many signals that I didn't belong there anymore, that I had to move on to the next stage of my life. Not even because the workplace was bad. That was part of it, but it was just time. Doha's a transient place. Expats move in and out of there every few years. It's not necessarily a place people are meant to stay unless they're from there or from the Middle East region. And I think my husband and I had maybe stayed about the right amount of time, and I was terrified of going home because it was a consistent salary with really great healthcare. It was, what I thought was the best salary I was ever going to make as a teacher. And I just was living in absolute fear of the decision to go home. And so I found you, and I've been to therapy, and I love my regular therapists, and they do a lot of mindfulness work, but I needed something to get much deeper. And I just will never forget our first conversation where I was talking about how I needed to leave my job and move home because of money, and somehow it ended up back at my mother, which I hadn't told you anything about my mom. And I wasn't even planning on talking about my mom. And we start talking about my mom, and I'm like, what does this have to do with it? And by the end of the session, I'm like crying and I'm ready to leave because you had unpacked this baggage and these fears I had of basically, going home and living with my mother. and it was, I think we did about 4 sessions in a row, and it was so transformative. It was like a gift I wish I could give everyone, because connections were made I had never thought of, and I actually had the courage to say, I'm ready to leave my job. which I can't believe how terrifying and exhilarating it was when I finally did that.
Why were you there in the first place?
I thought I was there because it was a really good opportunity, but then you said I was running away from my mom. So, which, at first I was like, no, this was just a really good job. And now I see that I had gotten as far away from as possible from my family. I had run towards money and security in a really distant place. And in a way, I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad I discovered I didn't need to do that. And in fact, I've shockingly repaired my relationship with my mom in a lot of ways, which isn't to say it will ever be perfect, but every time I would talk to you, I'll be like, well, I'll never have a relationship with her. And you'd be like, no, wait, don't say that. And, she is someone who has a personality disorder. It's not her fault. It's not something that can be healed. And I've found a way that I can have a relationship with this person, imperfect and flawed, but, I was estranged from her the entire time I was in Doha, and I've actually found a way back and a way to connect with her, and sort of heal a little bit of what's happened. I mean, we've just started talking, it's been less than a year since she and I've been talking, and it's been more gradual, our communication. So we have a long way to go, but I am more optimistic than I've ever been. Just a few months ago, I talked to you and I said, oh, well, we'll never have a good relationship. And you're like, no, don't say that. And I'm actually seeing how that's possible now, which is absolutely crazy to me. So
it's absolutely beautiful. I think what has been so amazing to see with you is, I believe that your relationship with your mother, every person's relationship with their mother, you carry these patterns and these behaviors that you're going to take into your own mothering of your children, unless you figure out what it is that needs to be healed, right? And I don't think you were expecting to get pregnant as quickly as you did, but I'm so glad we started with the work with your mother, because I believe that opened up an ability to mother in you that has changed how you are with your child.
It's probably what got me pregnant, Viv. Let's be honest.
Not really. There was more than that.
No, but that's true. My husband and I, before you and I had started talking, he and I had a lot of talks about starting a family and leaving Doha. So that was in the ether. That was something we'd put out there. But for me, I was like, sure, in many, many years from now, we'll do that. Not right away. And he was ready to start much sooner. And I went off birth control, but I thought, oh, I'll have all this time for my body to readjust. I've been on birth control for 15 years, and we have fertility issues on both sides of our family. And we were still, using the rhythm method. And so it happened somewhat by accident within 3 months of going off birth control. But the other thing that was, I'm still blown away by was the timing was so perfect that I was still able to use my maternity leave from my previous job, which I'd worked there for 6 years, and I felt more than entitled to take that leave, even though I knew I was going to be quitting. And what that maternity leave allowed us, because I was a college professor in Doha, is it allowed us to move home for the summer, set up our house, which we put a bid on before we even got pregnant, and then for me to take my maternity leave this fall. And that basically gave us 8 months of time where I was getting paid through my university, but living in the place where I wanted to live, which is Chicago. And what I feel like I did was like a giant trust fall into the universe. And the universe took care of me and said, look, we're going to get you back to Chicago, and we're going to give you some time to set your life up. And I tell people that story because I'm just like, you can't understand. I wasn't going to try and start getting pregnant until I found a new job, but then I was going to have to wait 2 years so I could be eligible for maternity leave. And I was trying to plan things. I mean, I actually wrote out a 5-year calendar of how things were going to go, because I was so anal and uptight about everything working out perfectly and us having the right amount of money. And I had no trust. And you also gave me the surrender experiment, which was completely transformative. And I developed a mantra from that, which I still try and say every time I meditate, which is almost every day, which is, I believe the universe is conspiring to give me everything I want and need, and I surrender to what it brings. And I guess I just want to say right now, I'm doing another trust fall into the universe, and I'm just as terrified. I thought I'd be less terrified, but I'm also, I have belief and faith now, and I've seen it work for myself and for others. So here we are.
Here we are, constantly evolving. So the surrender experiment, we'll start with that. It's an amazing book by Michael Singer. He also wrote The Untethered Soul. The Untethered Soul, I think, is a little harder for most, me included, for most people to get through because it's so philosophical and so deep and so wise. But the surrender experiment is more his journey of, really believing that the universe is going to support him and saying yes to everything that comes up. I remember I read it and I was like, whoa. He said yes to everything. People were building houses on his property and he didn't know it.
That was me.
I know. I'm like, what are they doing? And I remember telling it to you, and you were very trying to put things into boxes and plans and, schedules. And I was like, this is going to blow your mind, but I think it's the best thing you could do. And it did blow your mind.
It did. It was.
You want to share a little bit about it?
I mean, I still am working on living as openly as he did and with as much trust as he did. But so I have a lot of friends who have anxiety, and I try to give the book to them or recommend it to them. And I don't know, I feel like I think actually the tandem of working with you and reading the book was the magic that happened. I think you need a little person to person when you're reading that book, because maybe you're not so willing to just fully believe it, but and I've never had terrible anxiety, but I had a lot of anxiety about moving home. And my anxiety for life, it evaporated. I mean, it's bizarre because when things aren't going well, I'm just like, oh, there's some reason that things aren't going well right now. And when I say going well, I mean going the way I thought they were supposed to go. So we should be clear about that. And now I just realize, oh, the timing of this is supposed to work out as such. And if I mess with that too much, then I think that I'm gonna actually impede on the universe's wishes. That's kind of how I feel now after reading his work. I think you just have to follow the cues a little bit. And it doesn't mean you don't take agency and make things happen, but when it's really clear something isn't happening, and this is a segue into the graphic novel I've been working on, which has been a huge conversation you and I have had, because there's just been a lot of challenges with timing and things just getting drawn out from the publisher, from the artist, from our end, and me just thinking it's never going to happen and just putting all of my hopes and dreams in this. And it's still really hard, but sometimes just being well, maybe there is a reason this pace is this slow and the book is actually supposed to come out at the exact perfect time. And if I speed it up too much, maybe it'll be fine, it'll be okay, but it won't be what it's supposed to be. It won't be what this energy is kind of coalescing to make happen.
Yes. Well, and there have been so many phases of your book that we've worked through, right? So I love the idea of it. I have a teenage daughter, and to me, it's yes, speak up for all the young girls, right? Give them a voice. And, when we've looked at why were you in Doha? What is a woman, a Western woman doing in the Middle East at this university in this place that is so masculine, patriarchy, high domination, right? What were you doing there? And what were you supposed to be teaching or sharing in addition to what you were working on with your students? Your book was created there. It was birthed there, right? Yeah. And you tapped into an energy of the feminine that you could feel there that you couldn't possibly have felt in the same way here in the States. So I'd love for you to talk about, what the book is about and then how it it bubbled up, because there are so many people who would love to write a book or would love to create something. And, how do you allow that to come out?
So when I went on my pre-hire visit to the university, I went to a girls' basketball game at the university, and I was just taken with these girls. They were so fun and so athletic, and the girls' basketball team was actually the biggest sport in the school. It got more attention than like the guys' football team, and by football I mean soccer, but the guys' football team, and there was just an energy around it. And so I had originally wanted to tell a story about something with like a girls basketball team in Qatar. And then it just evolved, and it's kind of become nothing like that anymore. It was going to be a short film that was 5 minutes, and it transformed into this 500-page graphic novel that's about a young girl named Asra, who's kind of the star soccer player in her little village. And she gets, this is in the 1970s in Qatar, so she gets a lot of attention from this that isn't always good. Some people love that she's this sort of flashy soccer player. Some people think it's a little too much for a girl her age. And she draws the attention of an evil fortune teller who ends up stealing her soul. And when she steals her soul, she turns her to stone, and she becomes a statue in the middle of the village. And she's sort of a reminder to not stand out. And 40 years after she's turned to stone, a little girl has always been really fascinated with this statue in her village. And this is actually the last remaining little girl in the village, because this evil fortune teller has been turning women to stone all around the land. And so this little girl touches Asra's statue, and Asra breaks free. And so these two girls, Asra, who's about 16, and this little girl who's about 8, they go off on a journey to release women from these statues. And with each woman they release, these women are from all different time periods, because the evil fortune teller has, she's immortal, she's stealing these souls for immortality. So she's been around for decades. And so there's women from like the 50s and who are, pearl divers, and the 60s who are Bedouins that sell makeup made of natural botanicals, and they each have a little bit of a story. And of course, eventually they defeat Umalal. I have no idea where this happened. It just little pieces came. And it just took a long time. And I'm someone who, prior to this, I had just made short films. That's kind of been my main creative outlet. And those I turned over pretty quickly, like within a year. And then suddenly I had this sprawling thing that's been taking its time, and I wasn't used to that. And I wasn't used to relying so heavily on other people. When I made films, I could push things along a lot further, and I just needed people for the pieces. And now I needed a publisher, and I needed an artist. And even as I'm talking about it, I'm realizing what a leap it was for me to make this. And I didn't trust in the process a lot. And I also think that sometimes I wanted the outcome to be about glory and money and, whatever. And I've told you about this book I'm reading, Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. And I think anyone who's taking on a creative project also needs to read that in tandem with the Surrender Experiment. Because Elizabeth Gilbert, I think she gets it. And she's just like, you just have to do things for the love. And if they don't work out, they don't work out. And if they do, it's like, don't do it for trying to be a bestseller. And between that and one of the last conversations we've had, I'm like, you know what? I just need to go back to the Anne that was sitting in the stadium of, the university, watching the basketball players, who was excited about an idea, and not be the Anne who felt like, oh, I have to do this book because I need a promotion, and I'm not going to get a promotion until this book comes out, and I need money because I'm terrified of life, and I'm not going to make any money until this book comes out. I had a lot of that energy on the project, and I think at times that's what stifled it as well.
Yeah, what I love about you too is how self-responsible you are. So we would talk about it in a session, and you would we'd practice something or look at something or clear it, and then we'd talk a few weeks later, and you're like, oh yeah, so I went back to that probably 5 times, and each time I found another layer and I cleared another piece. You have been so responsible to do your work in between the accountability of the sessions, that you've moved through layers so fast, you know, and I think you've identified for yourself the patterns. You just did it last week. We were supposed to have a session, and, you know, in 3 days you went from this is my decision to this is my decision, and all of the processes that you had gone through, and you were clear.
Yeah. You
were clear on your choice. Yeah. There's been a lot of energy, as always, right, tied up in the book, because you birthed it. It is a baby of yours, this idea.
Yeah, and I guess I want to say to that as well, to like doing the work in between sessions for listeners out there. Like sometimes, in fact, often my meditation or like my just sitting with myself, whatever I'm doing to do that work, sometimes it's just really bad. It's like a bad meditation session, bad in quotes. I mean, I just had one last night. It was like a beautiful night in Chicago. It was unseasonably warm. The wind was blowing. There was like an almost full moon. And I sat in my yard in this like perfect environment. And I just didn't have a good meditation session. I just wasn't focused. I did my best. And it's really hard with a kid now. It's really hard with a baby to find time. So it's not, it's not as regular as it used to be, but I've just given myself permission to have bad meditation sessions, but just to sit and just to do it. I'm like, just sit here and do it, even if you're unfocused, even if you keep opening your eyes, even if your brain is running away, just do it, because it's more about getting in that habit so that one day you hit gold. And even, you know, some days I'll just have a magical session and it's great. And then some days I don't get anything out of it. And some days I get like this little tiny thing. And I'm like, oh, that's probably all I needed today was this little thing I moved. So I did just want to say that as well, because I think that like sometimes I hear about people doing this stuff and I'm so intimidated because like, oh, I'm not doing it right, or I'm like not doing it enough. And it's just like, allow yourself to be bad and you'll get to the good stuff.
Yeah. And it really is like building a muscle, you know, allow yourself the time to just sit and to feel. And I do a lot of meditation, but I do a 30-minute meditation each day where I'm guided by music, and you say Satanama like for 10 minutes, and then you have 10 minutes of silence, another 10 minutes of saying the Satanama chant. And the first few times I did, I was like, this is the longest 30 minutes of my life. What is this even about? And now, you know, months of doing it, my body is in such a trust. It's that surrender again. You know, my body trusts that this process is a quiet space. It's a time to still my mind. And I mean, literally the thoughts like fly through, I'm yawning, I'm clearing energy. And at the end, I just feel centered and grounded again. So it takes a while and it takes consistency. And I think you do amazingly well, especially for having a baby. A new baby really throws a wrench in self-growth in one way.
Yes, it's like great self-growth, and also you don't have time to stop and reflect is the problem. Like you're growing, you're just not reflecting on how you're growing. So
yes. Yeah. So let's talk about your soul filters for a moment. And then I'd love to spend some time on your pregnancy and
yes,
the delivery and the joy of this little guy in your life. So what I would love to do is share how I see your soul filters, and then perhaps have you reflect how you've interpreted it, or, you know, what it means to you.
Yes.
So yeah, you and I have the same primary, which is the Orion. The Orion filter is busy. They're very busy. They do a lot. When you're a soul who decides to come down and be this Orion filter, you know that there is this ability to bring together, you know, lots of people to see what individuals have as their brilliance or their gifts, and then find the ways to kind of network all of them together. So you can identify this one and pull them together, and then something new gets created, like a constellation. Something new gets formed that has not existed before. And so when we decide to come down and do this magic, you know, we're super excited. We're like, yeah, that's going to be really easy, and I'll be great at it. And then when we come here, often, you know, and this is a general statement, but often we are taught independence fairly early, because we need that strength of knowing we can stand on our own and knowing we can trust our own intuition. And so as young children, were often, you know, early walkers, early talkers, self-sufficient. I was a middle child, so I was always taking care of my little sister and trying to keep my big brother out of trouble. You know, there was a lot of that mediating and, you know, organizing, which prepared me for the gift of my soul, which is what I'm doing now. And so we tend to believe when we're little that, you know, we're going to get abandoned, or people aren't going to be there for us, because that's what we're seeing right around us, is people aren't taking care of us. They're taking care of everybody else. And so we have to do it ourselves. So sometimes we end up in this kind of victim space, which I know I was in for quite a while. Like, I have to prove myself to everyone. I have to make sure I'm really good. I have to do more than everybody else to show that I have value. And as we start to heal those old stories, we can settle into our gifts and let go of some of the older shadows, the older stories. So you and I definitely have had some matches with that, you know, the schedule, the busyness, the trying to do everything for everyone that you, my gosh, in Doha, like you were a fighter. You were out there championing every cause you could, which brings in your secondary. Your secondary is a planet. And so the planet, they're crusaders in a sense, right? Like they're solid and they're planted and they're firm, and they're, you know, just like a planet is when you look at it in a celestial sort of sense. The planet is solid. It has an orbit. It goes around the same rotation, and it knows what it's doing, and it has a plan, and everything's under control, right? Which is what you were living for a long time. When the two are combined, when you have specifically an Orion and a planet that come together, what I have seen with that combination is they are, I mean, crusaders is a great word. They will fight for the injustice. They will champion for the underdogs. They will see new patterns, just like the Orion shows you, like the new constellation, the new network. But that planet in the back is like, let's go, right? Let's go fight. Let's go make sure it gets done. Let's make sure it happens. Don't back down. And so they get a lot of shit done. I mean, just a lot. And it's usually very powerful to watch from where I sit. So yeah, what do you want to say from all that?
Yeah, there's so many things.
Talk away.
Okay, well, just really a quick note is one of the first things you said about bringing people together in film. That was always my favorite part, because even as a director, you don't do everything. You find a production designer to make the room look pretty, and a cinematographer to take great shots. And I really loved getting people excited about the project I was working on, and then having them come and bring their gifts. And my favorite part was even when those people would add something to my story or transform it and change it in some way that was even better, and just being like, whoa. So that part, when you said that, when we did our soul filters conversation, I'm like, wow, that is my favorite part of collaborative creative work. And even with the graphic novel, bringing together a publisher and an agent and an illustrator and my husband. And so that rings true for me. And then the other piece about the championing and fighting the injustice, you know, that is also really true. And it was really true for me my last year at the university I worked at. Again, a lot of the system was set up in a way that a lot of people were treated unfairly. Specifically, I felt women and people of color. And I don't actually think anyone intentionally ever set the system up that way. That's what's very interesting to me about systemic racism and sexism. No one is going around being like, all right, we're going to set it up so white men are doing really well at this school, or men in general are doing really well at this school. It just kind of happens. It's kind of, we brought a system over from America. Most of America's institutions are set up this way. I learned about something called in-group bias, which means that you're more likely to uplift people who look like you. So, which isn't a bad thing. It's just what happens. And then if you have, you know, white men at the top of an institution, so forth and so on. So this was the kind of milieu that I was in. And when I realized all these injustices were happening to me and then to other people, I started fighting, and I started fighting for myself, but I almost got more enraged for other people who had it even worse than I did. And not to take it away from Soul Filters, but one thing that was really great about working with you on this was you kind of identifying that aspect of my personality, and also saying, like, hey, like, you have to let people fight battles for themselves. And I really struggled with that. Because I really worried over other people, and I'm like, but they might not have the capacity. There is specifically one guy who I felt like was just very vulnerable because he wasn't a US citizen. And I just felt like, oh, I really have to take care of him. He's like a very gentle, amazing human. And I'm like, well, he can't fight this battle. And I completely underestimated him, and he is totally taking care of himself. And I was almost about to prevent him from coming in to his own. If I meddled too much. I think that I showed him what was going on, and that was like extremely helpful. And I showed him that I was fighting, and so he saw, oh, well, someone else is fighting, so power in numbers. But he was completely able to handle this himself. And I have a tendency, I think, to do that with a lot of people, and that's something that you had identified for me in the past, is like there's this really remarkable aspect to it. And that also, like, you know, take all those things that are remarkable about this aspect of your personality, about this soul filter, about like this combination of Orion and the planet, and also remember that other people have to have their own experiences. So you don't want to like impose upon other people. And I think what's really nice about that is using this work to find your strengths and make sure that they stay very focused. And because sometimes I just, in a way, I can use it as a distraction to not look at myself. It's like, oh, well, I'm so busy championing for other people that I don't have to work on my own stuff. You know, so yeah, that's been, but it's really just been nice to also have sometimes to hear about yourself and have it solidified and identified, because you don't necessarily recognize your strengths or what you're doing. Yeah, I think that's been tremendous, because then it's like, oh, okay, like now I know what I can use in the future, and also like when what I'm using is actually becoming a little bit of a distraction away from myself.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, what I've noticed for you, and this is so true for many people, you know, we're really good at saying, these are all the things I do wrong. These are the things I'm terrible at. And we forget to go, you know, what are the things I came here to share with the world that are really good, that are powerful, that can, you know, influence others in a way that empowers them. And you've done that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's just so, it's nice to know, because when you feel that kicking in, it's kind of like, oh, okay, this is my thing. This is where I shine. That's great. You know, I think we're not very generous with ourselves, unfortunately, as people. And I'm trying to be a little bit kinder to myself and say, oh, hey, well, I'm not, you know, this amazing auteur director who does everything myself. I'm not Robert Rodriguez, who writes and directs and does the cinematography, but I'm this other person. And here's my skill with that. And there's some beauty in that.
Yes.
So.
Well, and your voice has a unique combination of stories that you bring that nobody else's voice has. You know, your path, it's interesting because we've looked at this so many times together. You know, why did you end up in Doha? Why did you have a family with the dynamics that you had? Why did you pick the Midwest? You know, like this is my philosophy, but your soul knows in advance what sort of environment it's going to step into so that it can get the biggest growth or the most expansion during this human life. So there's no randomness to it. And I think that's what the surrender experiment really describes so well. He's like, the universe knows better than I know, right? Because my soul is trying to fit into this small human body, and the mind is going, oh yeah, I know everything. Listen to me. The soul knows more.
Yeah.
It knows way more.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. We also talked about me maybe going to the Middle East because I'd had some like past life experience there, which made sense, where I'm so fascinated with the history of women there. Even more than I am the history of women in the States. So who knows what happened there, you know? But yeah, there's clearly something that was calling me into that place.
Yeah. Well, and then the story that birthed from there, you know, we've looked at it energetically, and it is a powerful story. It is a like there's just this whoosh that I feel underneath the momentum of the book. And there was just an article recently that was published that you shared on Facebook, which was awesome, talking about how you've been able to collaborate. And as an American in the Middle East, you've still been able to get this book to this point where it's close.
Yeah, it's very close. Yes, I have to remember that too. I definitely get like, oh my gosh, it's not ready yet. Yeah, it reminded me of one other thing you said where I was a little bit worried about the reception of the book. And, you know, I am a white American woman coming in and writing this story about Arab women. And that's always very sensitive. And I think I've done my homework. I did years of research. I had like 10 students read this book at different phases, and they all offered criticism and critiques, and I took their feedback really seriously. But there's still going to be, you know, a lot of pushback, and rightly so. But, you know, one thing you said that was so wise and wonderful was, you know, that's not really for me to determine. Like, I just have to put it out there and let the conversation happen. And again, I think it's my responsibility to do my homework and make sure it's what I think the best representation is of possible, and you know, the most authentic that I could possibly write as a U.S. citizen who's only lived in this country for 6 years. But after that, it's really, you know, and maybe it ends up being a springboard for other creative work as well, and other people being like, I'm gonna get this right, she didn't get this right, and that's fine. Actually, sometimes I'm actually just okay with that. I'm like, well, I want to tell this story, but if people aren't satisfied with it because they don't feel it's right, it gets more of these stories out there, because there's just not enough women in storytelling yet. You know, there's not enough of the feminine in storytelling yet, and I think that's coming. But sometimes I think it takes women being like, all right, we've got to do this. You know, we've got to have more representation. So yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what I believe too is, you know, this might lead right into climate. We're just going to touch all subjects. I believe every person bringing their knowledge and their wisdom and their strength and their voice into this moment creates something that hasn't existed before. And then each new moment is constantly being formed by all of those voices, all of those people, all of those energies coming together. So if one person says, I'm not going to speak, I'm going to hide, I'm going to go back in the corner, you know, the now is less than what it could have been because that voice wasn't added in. So your voice bringing your story, and then your artist bringing his unique interpretation of the graphics, you know, the images that are going to take your words into images. You know, if he pulls back, the story is less than what it could have been. And it's like all of that energy, to me, it's like Play-Doh. I think we looked at this once, didn't we? Like Play-Doh, like you're constantly forming and molding and shaping something into something new. And so if we aren't all bringing that creative energy forward, if we aren't all speaking our truth, it's less. It's always going to be less.
Yep.
Yeah. So go on, girl. Yeah. So let's switch for a moment and talk babies.
One baby.
One baby. What would you like to say?
Oh my goodness. Well, like I said earlier, I do feel like it's funny that I'm so glad I had the date we started working together, actually. So September 9th, we started working together, and I think I got pregnant like the first week of November. So it was like 2 months of working together, and I think we worked together almost every week up until that point. And I think I did open something in myself that allowed that pregnancy. I think I had a lot of fears about having a baby. I know now, ever since I've been pregnant, I'm constantly talking to women who have fears about both pregnancy and having a child. And I think a lot of that stuff goes back to their own parents, but also to society and like a lot of the ways society talks about parenthood. And I feel so grateful because I just had a lot of that noise myself, and the experience has been totally different than everything I've heard. And You've also given me a lot of amazing books, also The Conscious Parent and Mama Zen, and like these really beautiful books that made me think very differently about how you parent. And it's so so another thing that was happening though is as I'm pregnant, I'm also like fighting this battle at my university, and I'm like championing, you know, for these causes. And in some ways I wasn't very focused on my pregnancy. Like I was eating healthy and I was like walking and like talking to the baby, but I just feel like I was like a little bit disembodied from the experience on the other hand. And working with you, like you really kind of would force me at times to think about that experience and what was going on, which was really beautiful. But I think I was actually a little bit resistant sometimes because I was like, no, but I'm like working on all these projects, and I was so worried about how I would do my work after I had a baby. And then when Kenneth came onto the scene, I was like, oh, I don't care about my work, or at least I don't care about it in the same way. And I was like, well, that was stupid. So I really appreciate that you, at least when I was pregnant, brought me back to that, and you know, were helping me focus on like the importance of that, because when he came, I just realized my priorities shifted in like a very cliche sense. And it's not like I'm still so interested in doing my creative projects, and I'm so interested in this life and this person I am outside of being a mom and a parent and having a family. But I am also so kind of overwhelmed with all the ways that he has changed me, and all of the love that I feel for him, and all of the things I want for him. So that has been like, you know, quite incredible.
Yeah. Do you mind if we go back to the pregnancy for a moment?
Nope.
You're so willing to go wherever we want to go. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I've done a lot of work for myself and then also for clients with abortions and miscarriages and pregnancy, you know, and then moms of children. Like I've kind of covered all different angles of it, but with you, it was like this entire walk through the process, you know, from before, during, through the delivery, after the delivery, you know, now that you're integrating as a mom and a worker, you know, a creator. And it's been, and I've also deepened into my ability to connect with energies over the last couple of years specifically. And so when I remember there was one session where you and I were on the phone, and it was, and I felt this before we got on the call. I was like, it was almost like I could hear a voice. It was really wild. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I was like, what is going on? Like it sounded like, it felt like an energy was trying to talk to me. And at the time I was thinking, this is really creepy. Like, you know, I don't do channeling. Like, I don't do that thing that seems like it's going to happen. And then we got on the call and I was like, oh, like it's her little guy. Like I could just sense that there were, like he's a soul, you know. Well, let me back up. The way I believe it works is souls agree before they come into human bodies who their parents are going to be, who their siblings are going to be, where they're going to live. So we'd already covered that for you, right? Like you picked your mom and you picked your dad and you picked your siblings, you picked Chicago, you picked Doha. But now we were on the other side of that. Like someone picked you and you picked that little someone. And so there's a bond that you agree to as souls. And now here you are in the human form, and there's a merging that takes place, right? So when the soul decides to inhabit the little tiny baby human body inside your belly, the soul and the body have to kind of get together and merge in some way. And then you are supporting the merging by being the space holder. You know, it's all kind of forming.
Yeah.
This sounds really crazy as I'm saying it, but it's also exactly how I know it works. And Journey of Souls validates that with the regression therapy. You know, he's taken people back to the womb and they're like, oh, like I have a body and I have hands and they do these things and I'm floating in the mother and it's so warm. And, you know, it's really just incredible work. And I remember that first call where, I mean, I could just feel the energy of his little soul going, I'm here for some big work. Is anyone listening? Is anyone paying attention to me? Do you remember how that felt as a mom when I was saying that? I'm sure it's kind of wild.
No, it is, but it's been, I guess the piece of the work that we did that has been the most helpful, which I forget all the time, and I think any parent forgets this part of the work, or this part of the contract or whatever, or maybe most parents don't even recognize it's the contract, but when you have a baby, for like guys who haven't ever had babies, or for women who haven't had them yet, like your hormones are so crazy. Like it's like an amazing drug. It's the best drug, right? And the level of protection you want to give to your child, and I still, every day, I'm like 3 months out and the hormones have like mostly subsided, and I have this intense desire to make like everything perfect for him. And so when we were doing that specific session, I believe it's like when you started laying the groundwork and started showing me like, no, like Kenneth has to have like his own path. He's gonna have to make his mistakes. He's gonna have to have wounds that help him grow, and he's here to do his own work, and like I'm just like a facilitator, which is funny because that's how I feel about my students. You know, like my students sometimes, when like they've done something well, they're like, oh, thank you for everything you taught me, and I'm like, I just facilitated what you already knew. Like, you were already talented. I just gave you a classroom and like 16 hours, you know, a semester or whatever, however much time to like do this work, like, you know. But when you're a parent, I think there's, again, this like really intense connection that you don't feel like a facilitator. You feel like, I have to teach you everything. I have to control this experience for you so that you're not ever hurt. I have to like make sure things go really well for you. And in reading The Conscious Parent, you see how that can go really into overboard when a parent is like, well, you'll be better if you're like a beautiful, attractive child and you're getting bullied because, you know, you've got these awkward glasses. So we're just going to make you beautiful instead of addressing the experience of getting bullied. And, you know, I probably would have judged that even before I was a parent, because my dad really let us be very autonomous. And I think my dad was more of a facilitator type of parent. My mom was the polar opposite. She was a controlling, like, I'm going to control this experience type of parent. But I would have been like, oh yeah, of course. Like, of course you just facilitate a child. But like your body is like screaming for you not to do that. So sorry not to go off on such a long tangent, but what was really nice about you doing that and kind of continually reminding me every time we connected with him was that, like, yes, we are his parents and there's some really wonderful, special, unique bond here. And he picked me as this facilitator for sure. And he picked my husband, Adam, as a facilitator, but he is definitely here to have his own experience. And I think, I don't know, I'm just grateful for that reminder really early on, because it's a challenge to allow your own child to come into this world. And I have to remind myself, I had terrible things happen to me when I was younger. I was also bullied. I had heartbreak. I had times I was really broke. I had times I had depression or felt like I was a failure or self-doubt, and I wouldn't trade any of those things. You know, I would not say, oh no, erase those things. Like, I think most people, when they look back on those experiences, know inherently that there was some reason they had them. So I am so grateful we had those sessions and I had those reminders, because again, I had no idea what it would feel like after he was born. And at the time I enjoyed them and I thought they were good, but I think they really started to resonate with me when he came into existence. And I was like, oh, this is what that was all about. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're such a beautiful example when you heal those wounds in yourself, right? Like, we started with the stories, the beliefs you had about your mother. And, you know, when you could pull back and see the contract with you and your mom and the way she's taught you strength and courage and independence, you know, then you don't take those wounds into your own parenting of your little guy. And so he doesn't have to go through that cycle that you do of healing this stuff. I mean, he'll heal some things that you're going to screw up because we're parents and we always screw up somehow, but it's going to be different than perhaps the depth or the level of pain from previous generations. I don't know if I said that very well. Like, I think our generations carry wounds. And so the next generation, if we're waking up, we can heal what happened with the parents before us. And so then the next generation after us doesn't have to go through that same clearing out. So I have such optimism for the future generation of children.
Well, it's so, I mean, how else would we evolve if not every generation gets things a little bit better? I mean, that's, you know, it's clear we've evolved as like a human race, and that has to happen somehow. And so it's not about saying, you know, I think a lot of people also want to look back on the past and look back on their parents and be like, oh, you were awful and this and that. And it's like, I think that was just, they were at that level. That was the next step. Yes. Maybe some people transcended that step, but it's no one's fault if they didn't, if they were just in like the cultural conscious that was like, now we're here. And now Adam and I are in the cultural conscious that's like, now we're here. And, you know, Kenneth is going to look back on us and be like, oh, you guys just didn't even know. And it's like, well, yeah, but we got you to where you are. Now you're going to know for your kids. Yeah. I do have optimism too. It's funny because one of my other freakouts when I had a kid that you helped me work through, which is still in like mildly not surrendering to, is the climate change issue. And I started having a lot of guilt about having a child in the age of climate change, and what have I done that I've brought a new being into this world when there might not be a world for him in 20 years, according to the scientific, you know, calculations about how many degrees the Earth's temperature is going to raise by 2036 or whatever. And that was really hard for me. And you reminded me that, you know, I wasn't accounting for the collective conscious at some point, waking up and changing things, which I'm trying to trust fall into that. And, or even if it doesn't, that Kenneth is here to have some kind of experience in the world as it is or as it's transforming. But one thing I kept thinking when I was like worried about, would he have a habitable environment to live in? I just kept being like, but it's just getting so good. You know, I feel like with the news and like the election and the shootings and like, there's a lot of stuff going on where I think, and like Syria, like all of this horrible stuff is going on in the world. And we're, you know, we're in a very heavily mediated environment and social setting now where we see it all the time, right? So we think the world is more violent when actually statistics say it's less, you know? We're not medieval anymore where we're doing these like really grotesque things, and there's some form of law and order and all that, but we feel like it's worse. But in reality, again, statistically it's not, but also like you can just tell things are getting better. Like there's like a voice now for people who've been oppressed. You know, there's the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's going to transform things. And, you know, now whether you like Hillary Clinton or not, there's a conversation around sexism that didn't even exist 8 years ago when she first ran. A lot of people I knew weren't acknowledging sexism at all. And now we're like forced to confront it. Even if you don't like her, it's kind of like, oh, you have to acknowledge there's some sexism. And I do believe there's like this awareness raising, and there is the feminine coming in, and people are, and it's just about to get so good, I think, you know, and it's so exciting. And I mean, I don't want to like, again, deny any past generations that wasn't good. But, you know, because it's all building blocks and it's so beautiful, all of that in the past. So a little bit of my experience too with parenting is just trying to surrender to the fact, you know what, I got pregnant and he's here, and there's some reason he's here, and that he is designed to have this experience in this world as it is, and he and his generation, who knows what they're going to do and who knows what life is going to look like for them.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I love when you get passionate like that. That's one of the strengths that we talked about when we did your soul filter session. I'm like, you just see it. You see this whole grid. You see this pathway. You see the way that things can be guided towards. Like, it's, you know, whether whether people agree with leaders or not, like leaders standing up and saying, this is what I know. And if you don't believe or agree with me, then let's have a conversation about it. But I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to go hide, and I'm not going to stop using my voice. You know, when leaders start to do that, it churns up, it enlivens the energy of the collective now. And so then something new gets created because your spark leads to someone else's spark. So I love it. I love it. I've been telling you since probably before you had Kenneth. I'm like, can you make a video? Can you make lots of videos?
No. I have a list. I have a list of subjects, actually.
Yeah. I would love for other parents to have someone saying, you know, like, describe your morning. Tell us about your morning.
Okay. Well, the best part of my day is Kenneth wakes up and he's in a really good mood. This is like the last couple weeks. So my husband and I lay in bed with him while he smiles, and it's just like, oh, this is why I'm doing this. You know, I talked about all those parents who all my friends who are really worried about becoming a parent. And I'm like, man, there are so many terrible things that happen throughout my day. Just yesterday, he twice screamed in the car ride the whole ride home from one place to another, and I was losing my mind. And then I spend maybe 30 minutes with him in the morning where he's smiling, laying in our bed, and I'm like, worth it. Worth it. It's, you know, I live for those mornings, and I think I'll never forget that, you know. So yeah, those are my mornings. And then coffee. Coffee. Coffee and your baby smiling at you.
Yeah, so the transition that you're in right now, because you have this time and space, right, to figure out what the next step is. Do you want to mention some of what you're exploring? Because I think other mothers are in that same position. Do I go back to the same job I've done? Do I create something new? How do I create my own workflow?
Oh yeah. I feel like, first of all, just in general, I'm 35, and I feel like the people that I hang out with, I don't know if it's an age thing, hitting your mid-30s and wanting a career change, but most people I know have gotten on a career path and then being like, oh, this isn't quite right for me. I know myself more now and I want to make a change, but almost everyone is too terrified and doesn't really trust themselves. I was actually talking to a guy in his 50s. I gave him both The Big Leap and The Surrender Experiment. I gave him my copies because he's the smart, dresses like a dandy, just charming, wonderful guy who's had this great career, and he wants a career change, but he's afraid. And I'm like, you will always be able to make money. What are you talking? But I can't take that advice for myself. Anyway, specifically then also, I feel like mothers, when I talk to mothers, you do have that priority shift. It's not that you don't care about your work anymore. I don't want to say that. It's just that you realize, if I am going to leave my child to go to work, and I say this as someone who was adamant about not being a stay-at-home mom, right? I was like, I will not be a stay-at-home mom. I'm going to hit the gym after work. I'm going to do me. And then I have a kid, and I'm like, okay, how can I work it so I spend my maximum hours a day with this child, right? Complete transformation. But I still do want to go back to work in some capacity. But you just realize, if I'm going to be away from my family, if I'm going to be away from my child, I want it to be worth it, and I want it to be meaningful. And almost every woman I know is going through that. I think, and so basically, we have the choice of going back to Doha so I can finish my last semester. And that seemed to be the most obvious thing to do, because my husband and I had a freelance writing project that we've been waiting to happen, and it's just going a little bit slowly, which means that we can't guarantee we'll be getting income from it after my paycheck runs out at the end of December. And so it was obviously we have to go back to Doha. We're not going to have income as of January, and we can't go through our savings and and logic. But in my body, it felt very wrong. And it felt wrong to uproot my family. We've just settled in this house. We have our cats. We've got and we're we have to leave our cats behind, and then we have to go back to this apartment that we've taken all our personal belongings. It just felt wrong. It just felt not the right place I was supposed to be for whatever reason. But it's undeniable we'd be leaving a lot of money on the table. And it's really hard, I think, to wrap your head around that as any person what person leaves money on the table? Money is like a security blanket. And so one of the things that I worked through recently is, just saying it feels wrong. I asked you in an email, I'm like, am I supposed to be surrendering to going back to Doha or manifesting my way out of Doha, right? Am I supposed to manifest a job or whatever? I mean, obviously manifest and actually apply for jobs. And what I realized is I was not surrendering. I thought surrendering meant going back to Doha, but surrendering meant listening to my gut, which was screaming, don't go back. Trust that there is something you need to do here. Like my work in Doha is done. I have the graphic novel project that is set in the Middle East. The freelance writing project is also set in the Middle East that my husband and I are doing. It's a TV series set in Dubai. And I have a young adult novel I want to write that's set in Dubai. I have these projects that are set in the Middle East, but then I'm done. Like there's only so many stories I could tell about the Middle East. That's like not my world anymore. I think they came to me. I don't know why we're the ones telling them, but we are. But we're also done living there full time. We've said we'd go back and maybe live there part-time if one of these other creative projects fell through. But like my work at the university is like done. It's so obvious. And I finally surrendered to that. And like I said, I'm doing the trust fall into the universe that come January or February when I stop getting health insurance and a regular income, that there's something that we're supposed to be here for. And one of the things you said is like me just focusing on Kenneth, letting Adam kind of take over because I've been the breadwinner for the last 6 years, which he loves and would laugh about and enjoyed being a kept man. I mean, he was working, but he also got to like play and do work that he enjoyed because he didn't have to worry about, a steady income. So he could say, I'm going to work on a project I like. But now, you mentioned that this is maybe his time to step up and that he wants to take over this role. And it's funny because he, who also has his own anxieties about money, was like, we're not going back. Like, are you crazy? Like, no, we're supposed to be here. And I think it's because he's ready. And then what that means for me is like spending time with Kenneth and figuring out how do I take this next step? What is supposed to happen for me in my career? I love teaching. I love it. But every time I think about filling out a job application to be a professor, again, it just tightens inside of me. And the easiest thing to do would be for me to just fill out job applications for another teaching job and be like, well, this is what I know and this is what I'm qualified for. But then I'm just like, listen to your body. Your body is telling you to do something else. But it's scary because I'm like, well, what else am I qualified for? I don't know, So that's kind of my path right now. And so I don't know where it's going to lead, but I'm trying to honor that it's going somewhere. And in reading Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about, the best novels are written in 1 hour a day and no one ever has enough time to do their creative work. And I'm like, well, what if I just try and write the story that's been in my soul for years that I've never had time for? What if while I'm staying at home with Kenneth, I try and steal, moments to write this? Like, I've never done that before. I've always been someone who's like, I need 5 hours today to work on my stuff. And I always picked projects that were so expensive. I always have the most expensive projects, my films and like this graphic novel. I don't know what it is. I always just pick things that are so big. And I'm like, what if I did something small? You've got a half hour every day to work on it. You have no money. Like, what if that's like the lesson here, that I'm still supposed to create and again, take this leap? And sorry, not to keep going, but one of the other most powerful meditations we did was you had me talk to like my little girl and you had me bring little Anne and slightly older, petulant teenager Anne, and then like wise old Anne from the future to sit down at a table. And I actually don't go back to this meditation enough, and I really need to because it was one of my favorites. I don't know why I don't. I've started bringing my little girl into more of my meditations though. But little Anne was like a writer, and she loved writing, and she read Sweet Valley High and R.L. Stein and Christopher Pike and all of these books, and I would write my own little novels. And I just feel like little Anne is like, why did you never become a writer? So I love that I taught and I love that I became a filmmaker, but I think there's this part of me that I haven't honored yet. And I kind of forgot about her until you brought her up. But meanwhile, I'm actually working on all these writing projects, but not trusting them, not trusting that that's what I'm supposed to do, thinking, oh, I've got to get a stable teaching job. So I think that this is a little bit of my path now, and I have no idea exactly how it's going to unfold. And that is so scary. I loved being in school because you always knew the next thing. You knew what classes you were taking next semester. You knew you had a summer off. You knew you went back to school. I stayed in school and taught at a university. I never left that structure. And this is the first time I'm leaving that structure. I don't know. You got to come back to me in 6 months about how it pans out. I don't know. I'm just trusting.
But it's so beautiful to witness you trust, because it is like, you know, it brings up all your shit and you're like, like, can I do it? Can I do it? I love everything you shared. There's one thing I want to go back to about Adam, if that's all right. So you had said, you know, maybe this is a chance for him to step up. And what it looked like for me was more, you know, the two of you redefining the roles, right?
Yeah, step up is probably the wrong terminology. Yes.
Yeah, it's like you're kind of redefining. So there was this balance before of like you having the traditional working role and him, you know, coming in and out and doing all these different projects. And now there's like you being mother and him coming in and out. And, you know, so it's a rebalancing. We had one session with Adam. It was so fun to meet him, by the way, because, you know, we've talked about your relationship and how to support you both growing, but to have him on the call and then the two of you were sitting and you were holding your belly with the baby.
I actually wanted to talk about this session, by the way.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, do you want to say whatever?
No, you go ahead. I'll add in if I need to.
Because I wanted to talk about it with parenthood, and then there's so many tangents, but when we were talking about the generations of what it was like in the past, and Adam and I talked about like how our parents just kind of, they stayed in the same job for 20 years. They buckled down, like you didn't leave a job. And so that's where a lot of my mentality came from of like, how do you leave a job? Like, that's crazy. You don't leave a job. And I think Adam felt the same way. And Adam also, not as soon as I was pregnant, but as we had this call about a month before Kenneth was born. And as the date approached, Adam has been working on this film that's been 3 years in the making. It's like the biggest project he's ever worked on. It's, you know, he's really poured himself into it and it's just about to be finished. But he's just like, I just need to buckle down and get a job. Like, I just need to get a 9 to 5. We got a kid to support now. And, you know, in many ways, I didn't want him to. I'm like, no, you're just on the verge of doing something. You can't quit. Everything is for naught. All of the last 6 years, you know, were for naught if you just quit. And you told him that, oh, I hear the baby crying. He might need food soon. Okay. This is like his little timer of we're wrapping up. But anyway, and him saying, I want to be heard in this conversation. Hello. That you told Adam, and this is something that stuck with me. He's like, she was like, you said, you know, you don't have to parent the way your parents did. They did what made sense at the time. Again, that was that collective conscious. You've got to have the stability to support your children, sacrifice, you know, your own careers or interests or whatever. But you were saying that Kenneth needs to see us try and dream and grow and put ourselves out there, and he needs that modeled. And I had never thought of that. You know, of course you want financial stability for your kid, but you also don't even think about the impact it would have on them. You know, maybe he sees us struggle a little bit. Maybe there are some lean times, maybe not, but that he sees us saying, we're going to keep taking these risks. We're going to keep taking these trust falls into the universe. And that he models that. Like, I think he needs to have healthy fears, of course, but I don't want him to be afraid of the world the way I was for 35 years. You know, if he's a little more intrepid, I think that would be amazing.
Yes. Yeah, it was so clear because I could just hear him, like, you know, this urgency of, I picked you guys because you're so cool.
Hold on a second. Yeah. Oh, man of the hour.
Hi, Adam.
Hello. How's it going? Hi.
Aw, look how big he's getting. He's so sweet.
All right,
I'll let you up.
Get out of here.
Get out of here. Yeah, it really was. It was like his energy, or, you know, the soul, I could feel him speaking, was saying, I picked you guys because you're incredible humans. Don't slow down. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? Go big. Go big.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I think he likes being on camera.
I think so too. Hey, buddy. He's calmed down. Yeah, this is when I talked to you when you were in the moon.
It's so wild to see him in the physical form, you know, and I think that's the beautiful part. Like, energy's so big, you know, like souls look so big to me. And then he's in this little package and you're like, that kid has a big voice coming.
Yeah, it's just like you and I seeing each other on video for the first time for this call and being like, I was like, oh, wait a minute, we haven't seen each other before, because you just realize that physical manifestation not as relevant when you're connecting on a big level.
Yes. All right, let me switch back to the side-by-side view. So, yeah, we're out of time, even though he's chilling. Oh, what a pleasure. Like, what a treat to hear you share and talk. And I so appreciate your time and your wisdom, my friend.
No, thank you so much for everything. This has been wonderful. It's been great to recap a year later.
Yeah.
So it's very special to me, especially with my next happening. It's kind of a beautiful reflection.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing her, sweetheart. My turn. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mwah. So much love to you.
Well, love to you as well. Bye.
Okay. Bye.